what we've asked folks to do is they're going to say a little bit about their various perspectives. Tony's going to begin and talk about his own journey within the workplace as a trans man and sort of his personal story. After Tony has spoken, then Stephanie will talk about the bill that's currently before us in the Connecticut General Assembly to protect people who are transgender and other folks who are gender non-conforming. And finally, George will talk about his experiences and Aetna's experiences, how they came to a position of affirming transgender folks in their company policies and making a place for folks who are transgender in the life of their business. So we'll have that, and then they'll present, and then we'll have time for, hopefully plenty of time for conversation and back and forth. So thank you for your questions. And again, please don't hesitate. They promise they won't be offended if you come on.
Please. It's actually
The way the room is set up. So.
All set?
Thank you.
All right, everybody hold on because I'm going to take you through a journey. I'm a manufacturing manager for Madison Company. I've been there for 10 years. And 4.5 years ago, I decided to surgically transition. And before then, they knew me as a lesbian. So I went to the personnel director, and I sat her down and I said, I'm going out for some surgery. She was like, oh my God, you're all right? And I said, I will be a better person when I come back. I'm going to go have gender reconstructive chest surgery. I should be out for 3 weeks. She had a blank look on her face. She had no idea what the hell I was talking about. So I educated her. She went and talked to the president of the company, who then came into my office and said, wow, really? And I said, yeah, really. He says, okay, we're supporting you 100%. I was like, really? Wow, that was easy. But I had 30 employees that worked for me that, you know, I just told them I was going out for surgery. I tried to kind of educate, but felt that it would probably be better if I waited until after I got back to really get into the education about what it's like to be a trans person and what the trans community goes through. So I went out and had my surgery, and my facial hair I've grown since I was 13. A lot of people don't believe that, but I didn't need testosterone to grow a goatee. So while I was recovering after my surgery, I allowed my goatee to grow, and man, I'll tell you, that was cool. So I decided to go back to work after 2.5 weeks. But I went back part-time because I was still, you know, it's pretty invasive surgery. So I went back and I was working like 10 to 2 or something like that. So that morning I got up and I had the razor in my hand. And I said, oh my God, I can't go back to work like this. I mean, you know, they even sent me a plant and said, you know, best of luck to you after the surgery, but they don't know what I look like now. I mean, and I'm telling you, I was freaking out. And then something hit me. I was like, whoa, dude, wait a minute. You have this one opportunity, this one window to go there and show them really who you want to be presented as. So I got in my car. I mean, I shake now when I talk about it because I was so nervous. And I pulled up to my parking space, and for some reason, I have no idea. I'm not a religious guy. I start saying the Serenity Prayer, right, out in the parking lot. I'm like, oh my God, grant me the serenity or something I can't change it. So I walk into the plant, and I have to walk through the manufacturing floor to get to my office, because my office is positioned right in the middle of the manufacturing floor. So my employees were like, they didn't know whether to look at my chin or my chest. They were like, oh my God. I mean, some things you don't have to announce, some things are absolutely obvious. So I didn't say I'm a man now, because I decided, you know, men don't say they're men. I just went back into my office and sat down and started working. And the president walked in, and he sat there, and he was like, he now, right? And I was like, yes, sir, he now. And he says, I'll let everybody know. But he couldn't do that to the 30 people that worked for me. To this day, actually today it happened to me. Somebody still calls me shitty. You tell her, is she going to know? And I've decided at this point, 4.5 years later, that it's really not my issue, and I'm not going to keep educating. But I do get feedback from my employees that I am a better supervisor. I'm not angry. They were like, you don't yell anymore. My God, you haven't yelled in like 3 years. I am grounded, I'm focused. I'm a much better employee because I'm allowed to present myself the way I was born to be. So everything is going pretty good there. And I'm really happy to share my story because I'm hoping somebody will say, you know what, that's right. It doesn't matter what gender you are, what gender you express. It's the type of worker you are that really matters. So that's my story in a nutshell. Oh, and the Jim Collins Foundation, can I mention that? Is that okay? I co-founded the Jim Collins, thank you. I co-founded the Jim Collins Foundation, which is a nonprofit that will financially aid the trans community in gender-conforming surgeries. So we're very, very new, and we need a lot of money. But besides that, but besides that, it's something I felt it needed to be done because it changed my life so much. Before I transitioned, I really didn't live, and I was reborn after my surgery and after I was able to present myself the way I should be able to. So there's literature up here if you'd like it. Before you leave, grab one. Okay? Thank you.
Oh, right, it's my turn. Yeah. Ready to come down the road here. And I also, we had the opportunity to be on a panel the other night.
Yes.
The story the other night was much longer, so I was sort of getting comfortable.
I know. That was my hysterectomy journey. That's a lot longer. The hysterectomy one is really good. It should be a movie, but anyway.
So I'm here to talk about the bill itself. I should give you a little bit of history first. Several years ago, the hate crimes law in Connecticut did not include disability or gender identity and expression. They weren't related. It just sort of, in all honesty, we think that the absence of disability is merely an oversight on the part of the budget. Like nobody got it, it went through and didn't have disability included. And so the two communities came together and worked on adding gender identity and expression and disability to the hate crimes law in Connecticut. And after, I think it took a few sessions, but we got it through and decided at the end of that, we've been talking about gender identity expression, we've been talking about trans folks. Trans folks have come up to the legislature and talked to their representatives and their senators and told their stories. And so, we should sort of capitalize on this, and there's some momentum here, and so we will get our representatives to introduce a bill to protect folks on the basis of gender identity and expression. Several years later now, we again have introduced a bill. Although we had momentum and we had folks who were up there, it's still taken some time to really educate folks in the State House to understand what the issues are, who it affects, and why it's the right thing to do. The bill itself, the proposed bill adds the language gender identity and gender expression essentially to the places in discrimination laws. So in housing, education, employment, in credit. Something is beeping. Okay. Beeping things, it makes me nervous. And so what it would do is to add that language. And so particularly in the employment context, which is where I work primarily, currently the state law prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex, on the basis of race, and so forth. And this would add gender identity expression, that you can't be fired, you can't be treated differently from other similarly situated individuals because of your gender identity or expression, which is a bit broader than depending on how you understand transgender. It would include folks who identify as transgender, and it would include folks who don't identify as transgender, but who other people have decided that they don't, that the way that they present themselves is not consistent with that person's idea about what it means to be a man or what it means to be a woman. Currently, the way the state of the law is that there was a decision issued by the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities a few years back, and what that said is actually quite similar to the Schroeder decision. You have Diana coming to you. Yet not as eloquently written, to say that sex, in fact, does include trans folks. The problem with the state of the law right now is that for most folks, for employers, for even individuals who are seeking information on their rights, they wouldn't necessarily know to look in a declaratory ruling at the Commission on Human Rights and Opportunities. And so by having legislation, it serves a couple of different functions. One is an educational function, that it lets employers know what the law is. It lets individuals know through, fora like this, through the various kinds of education that Love Makes a Family's been doing, that QUELF has been doing, that the Anti-Defamation League has been doing, that this is out there, and that once we get this bill through and it becomes law, that you will have these protections in employment, in housing, It's not a radical idea. There are 13 states and over 100 municipalities across the country that currently have language in their laws about gender identity and expression. So it's not an activist legislature that would be putting this through, but merely doing the right thing.
Thank you today.
Hi everyone, I'm George Skurlock. I work at Aetna. I'm up in Hartford, Connecticut, where we're headquartered. And Aetna, if you don't know, is one of the largest healthcare insurance companies in the country. We have over 35,000 employees, mostly domestically, but we're beginning to grow internationally. And in addition to us being a company that is dealing with these issues and facing these issues and addressing these issues, we're also a supplier of services to employers that would impact transgender surgery and things such as that. So it's in that vein that I'm here. I work in the Office of Diversity. My role is Diversity Alliance Lead, and one of my roles is to serve as an ally to our LGBT organization in Aetna called ANGLE. So, I admire these folks who can talk extemporaneously. I work for a big company and we learn about talking points, so I'm going to talk to my talking points here. Clearly, Aetna is willing to be a sponsor here and to be represented on the county.
Yeah.
Okay. We view the LGBT population, both the employees within our midst and the larger marketplace, as significant and important to us. Clearly, if you do an objective market analysis, the spending power of the LGBT community is very, very large and significant. It's a above average intelligence base, a discriminating purchasing population, and therefore fits all the criteria that we would look for people who would choose to be Aetna customers. So both from an employee base and a market base, this is a group and a market that's attractive to us. Are we a best practice employer in business in regard to LGBT issues? I'd say yes, but I'd also say that there are other firms further along in their understanding and policy scale than Aetna. I'd say like Microsoft is an example of an organization that I think goes even further than we do. But we consider ourselves a mature, diverse organization to include the LGBT issues. And we build our business on market segments and now include LGBT in those distinct markets to which we sell. We have dedicated marketing and advertising materials for the LGBT market, like 2 examples provided for you. Another example is a new service we added in 2008. We operate a website called DocFind. If you're a member of our company, you go and look for doctors that take Aetna insurance. Well, in 2008, we got a relationship, and I'm sorry I don't know the specific name of the LGBT doctor organization, and put a link from our DocFind to their physician search platform so that our LGBT members could do a direct search and find physicians, clinicians, special practitioners who are understanding, sympathetic allies, however we would want to phrase that. We received a lot of public press, particularly the LGBT media around that, and we were first in our industry to take that step. We've always used the LGBT reference rather than the narrow gay lesbian reference in recognition of the size and scope of that market, including our transgender colleagues and friends. Internally, we have one of the oldest LGBT organizations in corporate America. The organization is called ANGLE. 2 of our representatives are here, Rob and Matt. It stands for Aetna Network of Gay and Lesbian Employees. And we had a dilemma about a year or so ago around the name. We certainly want to be inclusive. We know that the community includes the BT as well as the LG, and was challenged with maybe changing the name of the organization. There was a discussion internally, and in business you think about things like branding. The name ANGLE had such a brand recognition internally that we thought we could find, first of all, we could find a name that would incorporate BT comfortably. It'd be an acronym that anyone could pronounce. And the other is that it had branded value internally. People knew what you were talking about when you said ANGLE. And so rather than give that up and try and start marketing, there was a reaffirming of the ANGLE name by the organization. So there's another one of our employee resource groups. We don't call our affinity groups or networks, and what we call employee resource groups. It's again part of the evolution and maturation of a mature, diversity-focused organization. Another one is a brand new ERG, employee resource group we formed, called ETVETS, the Aetna Veterans Organization. Now it includes currently serving folks in reserve units and military families. but the organization just couldn't get past @vets. It's so cool, the name, to be ramming with our first initial as a corporation and be able to say @vets, AETVET. So they said, we'll put it out there as @vets and understand that currently serving reservists and military families are also embraced within the name. So it's in that same context that we did that. Let's see what else. Oh, Angle is a model within our ERG community. We have 13 employee resource groups, not just culture, ethnic, but caregivers, generationally oriented, Boomer, Gen X, Gen Y, veterans, as we just identified, certain women's groups, working mothers groups. There's about to be transition to parents group. The men fathers, single fathers have expressed an interest to join as well. But the Angle Group has been a model for us because they have a national organization. Even though we're headquartered in Arthur, we have branch offices all around the country. And Angle was the first of our ERGs to establish itself as a nationally based organization, not just chapter by chapter in different offices. And that's a model to which the rest of the ethnic ERGs are migrating as well. They were also ahead of the curve in establishing a business plan and a mission statement for their organization, which really tied their work not just to work-life comfort or acceptance in the workplace, but also seeing how they could forward the business success of that. Again, addressing the LGBT marketplace external to our four walls. And that is now a model that the rest of our ERGs are doing. All of our ERGs are expected to do things to nurture their own community and their own members, but also expected to be drivers of, as much as they can, the top and bottom line of Aetna's business. And again, we look to Angle as the model for that. We're also at Aetna very proud of our 100% rating, the Corporate Equality Index put out by HRC. We've received a 100% rating for all 7 years that CEI has been available. And it serves as both a marketplace aid for us and an internal look, an internal reflection of our gay-friendly organization. And it's a driver of our behavior in terms of the transgender benefit that I'll talk about just shortly. In fact, we now have a team of employees standing by, including a group from Angle, who are waiting now for the new HRC guidelines, which were just promulgated around the revisions of CEI. And we're going to work with our employees, both on the benefit side of the HR side of the business and the Angle membership, to do what we can to drive and adjust our benefits over time, because the HRC, if you're not aware, I don't want to do a sidebar on educating about CEI, but they've come out with a new, slightly more stringent, refined set of criteria, and they're going to implement over 2 years. They're not going to say we're going to announce this year and you've got to comply this year. We're announcing this year, stage 1, we're announcing next year, stage 2. But we're going to give you a year to catch up, and we won't penalize you. But we'll give you ratings on both scales, as if you were under the new scale and under the historic scale. So we think that's a good way to operate, and we think within the time frame allowed that we hopefully, and I'm confident, we will retain our 100% rating as a result of the work that our Angle group and our benefits group are going to do. The first thing that I would announce in that regard is, as of 1109, Aetna now offers to its employees full coverage for sex reassignment procedures, for the surgical procedures. So it doesn't cover things like shortening or lengthening of the vocal cords, and a couple of other things which are considered cosmetic by our definition. Maybe we could get into, but we now offer that coverage to an employee, to our employees, who is added as of 1109, and becomes part of our portfolio of products that we offer to employers. I'm going to do a little sidebar here around how healthcare plans are assembled, and hope you'll tolerate that. So we now offer that coverage to employers who offer healthcare coverage through Aetna to their employees. That doesn't mean, however, that employers will in turn choose to offer that coverage to their employees, as there is a cost to the employer to add that coverage. Aetna did that internal evaluation for ourselves and decided to add the transgender procedures to our own benefit mix, as I mentioned before, as of January 1. So the sidebar conversation. When employees or people come up to us and say, why doesn't Aetna cover this or that procedure? It's something, in many cases, something of a misnomer to put that burden on Aetna. In most cases, it's the decision of the employer in structuring their health plan design to decide to offer a certain coverage or not. We'll offer everything to you. And it's almost like a cafeteria plan. We'll give you soup to nuts, employer. You decide which of those you will offer to your employees, and these are those each of those benefits has a cost associated with it, and you add those up, and that's the cumulative cost of that benefit package to that employer. And our actuaries and underwriters price coverage options to our clients based on what's called PMPM, per member per month. For example, employers that choose or not to include a behavioral health benefit to their plan, something called EAPs, Employee Assistance Programs. And that's an option that you can take with us. You can contract independently and get an independent EAP vendor. But if you choose it through us, the example, I'm just making it up here, the cost could be 10 cents PMPM. So for a 5,000 employee company, adding EAP benefits, so 5,000 times the 10 cents per month would cost $500 a month, or $6,000 a year. 60? 500 a month. 6,000, right? 6,000. The real cost is probably higher than that, but I'm just trying to, put up an example of process. So in most cases, employers share that benefit cost with the employees. The employer typically pays between 70 and 85% of the cost. Many of you are lucky, some of you are lucky enough to work for a state government where it's 100% paid, but for private sector, it's generally 70, 75% picked up by the employer. So there may be some additional cost to the employee as well for adding the EAP coverage to their plans. But it is a decision that the employer makes in structuring the plan, not a choice the employee has in accepting or not accepting certain coverage decisions. So the same process, that was a sidebar example, the same process applies in terms of setting rates for the transgender procedure benefit. Our analysis team of actuaries and underwriters has to take a variety of considerations into calculation to calculate a single rate that they can quote to employers, no matter whether they're primarily headquartered in San Francisco or Atlanta, where you might expect more utilization of a benefit such as this, or if they're primarily based in Des Moines, Iowa, or Bismarck, North Dakota. There I go stereotyping by geography, but there it is. Insurers also need to factor in the fact that female-to-male procedures cost 3 times the cost of male-to-female procedures. And if you permit me, maybe an inappropriate joke, seems like it costs more to add something than to take something away in that regard. Bill figure, right? But with all these factors and others in play, we have determined a PM rate for sex change procedures that we quote to our current prospective clients who want to add that benefit to their plan. Again, it's the employer choice to add or to not add. To be fair, even if an employer offers the sex change benefit, there are certain prerequisites or qualifiers that need to be in place for them to pay for the procedure. I have with me, I've not been authorized to circulate, but I have with me what we call our clinical policy bulletin around the new sex reassignment surgery. And so the sort of things that must be in place are members must be at least 18 years old, and it's a series of legal italicized ands. So must have had a lifelong sense of belonging to the opposite sex. Must have lived in society as a member of the opposite sex for at least 2 years. This one I found fascinating, but after reflection, I kind of chuckled at first when I read it, but then on reflection, took it more seriously and understanding now. Does not gain sexual arousal from cross-dressing. And. No, see what I went through.
I didn't mean to.
And then the member, so those are some of the things. And then also the member has to complete a recognized program of transgender identity treatment to include psychological assessments and any of the hormonal things that would lead up to the procedure itself. But all those things need to be in place. There need to be 2 certifications by a psychologist, et cetera, et cetera. But should an employee for a company that offers Aetna benefits, including this one, meet those criteria, then the procedure would be paid for. However, as Tony and I were talking about a little bit before, I think I alluded when we first started, certain things are considered cosmetic and are not covered. A rhinoplasty, facelifting, lift enhancement, facial bone reduction, etc., which are associated with feminization, are considered cosmetic and not covered. Similarly, chin implants, nose implants, lip reductions, which have been used to assist in masculinization. Trying to say that, George, 5 times. Are also considered cosmetic. I think this is probably an early stage. This is a new benefit. I think over time those things may be added, but that doesn't mean that Aetna always gets it right. Even I'm a loyal Aetna employee, and I think we do a lot of things right, but even I feel I missed the boat sometimes. I'm going to tell you my own story. I'm a recent prostate cancer survivor. Very successful surgery, 0 PSAs now, and I'm very happy. But a known expectation, a result of prostate surgery, is erectile dysfunction. Absolutely known. Why wouldn't you cover Cialis, you know, and the other things as part of that, which is what the doctors prescribe to you. I have to pay full retail rates. You know, I actually went to the shots. I didn't afford the pills anymore, but the injections that do it for myself. But none of that is covered by that. I've said 4 or 5 times in clinical settings with the chief medical officer, why not cover it? It's a known expectation, a known side benefit, or what's that phrase, medical phrase? Side effect of the surgery. Why wouldn't you cover that aspect of it when we know that the mental and psychological capacity of being able to be functioning sexually again is an important part of the recovery process? So, you know, we're good, but we ain't perfect. You know, so I think this is a good entry point for us in terms of offering transgender surgery procedures to both our employees and within our product portfolio for employers to choose to add or not to add. And I trust we will get better as we continue to improve and get better as we go along. But with that caveat, I do think we're well intentioned for the most part. I'll conclude my remarks and hope I didn't bore you too much with the healthcare rate making and employer decision making process, but I thought it's not widely known and would be helpful for our discussion this evening to have that on the table. So thank you.
Thank you very much, George. Thank you to Tony and to Stephanie as well. We've heard folks share a little bit about their experiences, and now I'd be happy to entertain questions for our panelists. Tony has talked a little bit about his experiences transitioning in the workplace. Would you say, Tony, that you've had a typical experience transitioning?
No, not at all.
Not at all.
No, I have actually a very nice, successful story.
Good.
Unfortunately, it's not always the case.
Okay. So, if we want to comment more for Tony or Stephanie or George, yes, please.
I'll start with Tony. From the way you said it, it sounded like your employer didn't do any education while you were out on medical leave.
They didn't do any education, and what I didn't mention in my story, and I'll mention now, is that nobody talked about the bathrooms. So when I came back to work part-time, I said, I'm waiting for them to approach me. So they didn't approach me, so I held it in until, 4 hours. Listen, I've been holding it in for 30 years, so 4 hours wasn't a big deal, right? But then I went back full-time, and nobody said anything. So I would leave at lunch, go to the mobile station down the street, use the bathroom, and come back to work. And then finally, every time I went into the mobile station, I had to buy something, because you have to do this. And I never bought, diet anything. I'm buying candy bars, so either I was going to gain a boatload of weight or I had to approach this issue with my employer. So I went into them and I said to the personnel director, I need to talk to you about the bathrooms. Oh my God, I'm so glad you brought it up. I was like, maybe right up, what do you mean? So they had me use this bathroom. It's a men's room, it's in the front office, but it's only, you walk in and there's the bathroom and you shut the door, you're all by yourself. Now, that being said, I realized when I came back that I wasn't the only one transitioning. That 30 people plus were transitioning right along with me. So I wasn't going to walk into the men's room and just say, yeah, move over. You know what I mean? It's just something that I didn't feel comfortable with. So I realized that, but I did get some flack from a guy. I was walking out of the bathroom and I heard him say to somebody else, oh, so what now? We got to keep putting the seat up now? So I popped my head in the office. I was like, excuse me. He was like, well, this is the first time I'm dealing with anything like this. I said, me too. First time I've transitioned. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll make a deal with you. I'll leave it the way I found it. If it's down, it stays down. If it's up, I'll put it back up. Is that cool with you? And I walked away. He's no longer with the company, not because of that, but So they didn't educate, but when I came back, they did help me. They were on my side besides the bathroom thing. They would tell people, it's he now, it's he now. And I found that if I didn't get angry about it. I let all the anger go before I transitioned. I didn't want to be an angry man. I was an angry lesbian for many years, okay? So you talk to people just matter-of-factly, it's he now, and people got it. There's just maybe 2 or 3 people now that still don't get it, but not my issue.
In retrospect, do you think the employer should have done the education and there should have been a more formal presentation?
I do. Especially, they didn't get everybody together and say, hey, Tony's coming back as a he, and they didn't do that. That probably would have helped, but they should have, the bathroom thing should have been addressed. That should be addressed. A lot of people take it for granted that they can just walk into a bathroom and use the bathroom. It has not been that case my whole life, because even when I didn't transition, you couldn't really, is that a guy's, and I would get, oh my God, this is a ladies' room, so I never used the public bathroom. And it can be really difficult. I do now, it's really nice. I hope I answered your question.
Part of the status of the way things are right now in Connecticut, and the reason we're working on this bill is because transgender people are often denied access to public accommodations such as bathrooms. And simple biological needs are being denied to transgender folks because we don't always have access to a private
Yeah,
bathroom.
and it's not a social event, you know, I mean, really, it really isn't, I never got that. I just went on my leave, you know, I don't want to be friends.
Thank you. Other questions? Yes,
I got a
ma'am.
question for George. If I owned a company and the information was made available for sexual reassignment surgery to be covered, my question would be, what is the incidence of that? So where are you getting the numbers on that?
Yeah, good question. Out of my scope, I'm an HR guy. That's the role of the actuaries and the underwriters. And I don't mean to deflect and not try to respond directly to your question, but
I'm just wondering if you
whatever.
knew something that I didn't know.
Yeah, whatever data is out there. I mean, these folks, the actuaries in particular, you know, specialists in data mining around that sort of thing. I would hope they drew in some consultants, you know, with some knowledge of the procedure in the industry. But it's, you know, projected to be a low utilization benefit, but important for those for whom it would be important to have. Yeah, but I'm sorry, I don't know directly the specific research. But virtually everything we do in terms of rate making is based on data. You know, that's the whole idea behind insurance. And
That's why I was asking the question.
Yeah.
Because it seems to be, there's no conclusive answers to that. So.
yeah. And in my research to be ready for what was going to be a March event, now the April event, was even the aha around the 3 times more expensive for female to male than male to female. Where did that number come from? I mean, I'm sure there's data out there around that. So that would be a starting point around pricing. People call it pricing and costing. So I wish I could be more declarative for you. So, yeah.
I want to follow up on the bathroom piece in the context of the legislation. Every so often, the issue comes up around legislation, you know, oh my God, trans folks in the bathrooms. The reality is that trans folks use the bathroom right now without legislation. And so the legislation, you know, is not going to cause a flood of trans folks who have previously gone to the bathroom to start going to the bathroom. What it will do, as you rightly pointed out, is protect their right to be in peace. And so, you know, it's not, because it does, it becomes this like, what do you think they're doing now? So,
Can I use that?
yeah. I take it.
Thank you. Question?
I just had 2 questions for George. I'm just wondering, first of all, if other health insurance companies similar to Aetna have kept up at all, or have also started including trans health coverage. And my second question is, what role, if any, do you think in the health insurance, private health insurance industry has in actually convincing employers to include, you know, these packages you're, you know, offering that include trans health coverage?
Sure. I think the major national players probably offer this benefit. I didn't do the research specifically to come for tonight, but I would think the United Healthcares and the WellPoints and the Humanas offer it. Don't know that for sure as part of the packages that they would offer. In some cases, driven by the employer. You know, the more progressive employers would say, I would look for my, and then the RFPs, the request for proposals, as you renew your insurance every 1 or 2 years or 3 years, whatever your contract is. You generally work with the broker and say, this time I want to be sure we got coverage that would include sexual reassignment surgery, and so the broker would then be sure to pick insurance companies to bid on that business to offer that coverage. So I think the major ones, I think the more regional ones, the smaller ones, may not yet, but depending upon the geographic, you know, certain regional geographies, I would guess even the regional ones are players. I would think the California regional Kaiser, because Kaiser's big, but Kaiser's a California base, and I'm absolutely sure that they offer it as well. And your second part of your question?
What role, if any, do private health insurance companies have in convincing employers to take this coverage? Or educating about it?
Yeah, I think it's more of a neutral. Here it is, and it's available to you. I think it's more of the other side. It's more of the employer driving, and that's the role that, you know, when you become employees of an organization that you can play. And the role that Anglo has played in our organization is to say, this is something we'd like to have, and be, you know, an appropriate advocate for the adding of that benefit. So I think it's more driven by the employer asking, make sure the insurer offers it, then the insurer trying to directly influence the employer to take it on as a benefit. It's offered as an offering, almost, the smorgasbord, and here's the smorgasbord of offerings, you pick and choose, but it's now, here, we now have this new offering that you can take on. So I think it's more of that rather than the health insurance driving.
I had a question up here, but first I want to mention, regarding the legislation, this bill that's coming before the General Assembly, these are postcards that Love Makes a Family is collecting to tell Governor Rell, when this legislation comes to your desk, sign it, please. To make these are postcards that we collect when we travel around, and their constituents, folks, voters here in Connecticut, sign these, and we collect them, and we'll hand deliver them. We'll bundle them together with postcards from all over the state, and hopefully come to Governor Rell with banker boxes full of postcards saying, sign this, please. So I'm just going to start these circulating. Take one if you'd like, fill them out, and then if you want to leave them or hand them to myself or Matt Struvis, my colleague, we'll collect them afterwards.
Isn't there a rally also, state council coming up?
Yes, there is a lobby day next Tuesday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Someone's going to go?
Yeah, I'm gonna go, but
We're
no.
going. Awesome. Road trip from the Maven, come on, everybody.
This is a lobby day to work with your state senator and representatives to lobby them personally and talk to them about why this is important to pass in Connecticut. So this is going to be next Tuesday. This is information about that. I'll start that as well. But didn't mean to hold your question. Please.
Okay, I have a statement to make first of all. Number one, I'm going to be here on Tuesday.
Fantastic.
Since I went full-time, I've been using Ladies in the Public and have here and in a number of the states and have never been questioned. Yeah, I'm waiting. But my question is for our ethnic representative. How would I find out from my company if they offer that within their pack?
Sure, just contact your benefits area, the Human Resources Department. That's what it's a big company, there'll be a benefits department.
Yeah.
It might just be an HR rep, if you use an outside benefits consultant, it's a smaller company, but the benefit people, you can inquire about that and even begin to say, I would like to see it if it's not there, and then begin maybe get some other employees together, get a petitioning process, internally. But that's the place to start, it's the benefits area of the HR department.
I would, can I just add, I've worked with my firm in we have a committee, I'm on the committee, taxes, health insurance, and for various, weighing various costs, benefits, partner benefit, all the different kinds of issues that we've come up with. And one of the things, particularly for smaller, it's often, some of the companies, particularly larger companies, have specific, as a benefit, sex reassignment surgery. Others are sort of silent on it, and it's about medically necessary, which then you get into sort of the requisites. And so even when there is a policy that says it has it, you have to sort of fulfill these somewhat burdensome criteria. And then there are, of course, policies that have the transsexual exclusion, which is sort of on the opposite end, which categorically prohibits it. And so it becomes, often the size of the company, the how robust the benefits are, and so it's not just either or. It's sort of a big range in between, and you can see even with a company that is more progressive, that has a great rating from HRC and so forth. I saw a couple faces when you were talking about the requirements to access this benefit that is in fact provided, and it's a rather cumbersome requirement that folks aren't often required to for other necessary.
I absolutely agree.
And so it's sort of depends on the size.
And there's a cost to adding the benefit, and so internally, in terms of strategy, internally it may be. What can you trade off? What benefit can be? Because particularly for a smaller firm, in this environment, in this tough economic environment, to take on any additional expense is tough. So this one you want, if you have the ability to engage in that dialogue with your employer, what other aspect of the benefit package would you be willing to trade off and not have as much of them? Do you drop the education benefit, or do you modify the education benefit to help to help be able to finance. But I think you need to be smart to think that in business terms, not just we want it, we need it, we should have it. You know, the bleeding heart appeal. It would be helpful, particularly for a business person, to come at it with a rational view. We know there's a cost to being prepared to engage in a dialogue around how that can be made affordable in some way. If it's a trade-off, it's employees take on 2% more of the burden of the medical coverage, a variety of ways to skim that cap. But I think it would be most helpful to come at an employer from a rational, expecting that there's going to be a cost, maybe a resistance, and how to look at the trade-offs to engage in. Does that seem fair to you?
It does seem fair, and I would add to it, I just thought sort of a bleeding heart, but sort of from the business perspective, that not only a bottom line part of it, but also it's about the employees too.
Yes.
The kinds of people that you want to attract and retain. And so, for example, my firm has an LGBT practice group, which was one of the reasons that I went to my firm. And that is in part, I mean, there's sort of the internal marketing and the external marketing. And so that's, and the fact that it's just a good thing that we do. And so I think there is an element of the argument for these kinds of benefits that when folks are, looking at employment opportunities, that they're saying, what are the benefits? And that's one way for folks, whether or not they're choosing to transition and access them, is something that folks with, kind of progressive agendas look for and say, this says something about the company that I'm working for. And depending on the company, that matters to them. And so, having that as part of the conversation, I think, is valuable as well.
Absolutely.
Stephanie, you sort of, you might be the person to speak to this. Would passing this legislation, would that influence more companies to start offering inclusive insurance policies or start offering inclusive employee policies?
It certainly wouldn't discourage them. There's nothing in the bill that would require folks to do that. There's been some conversations about what folks, when it passes, sort of who they can sue for what. And despite the fact that I am a litigator and enjoy trials and doing that, I think that it's important to keep in mind, what the bill is and what it's about and what it can do. And so I think that on trans exclusion language in policies, I think there might be some traction there. In terms of policies that offer some things and not others, I mean, as you rightly point out, there's a whole host of things that insurance companies don't provide for that are mind-boggling, frankly. And it speaks volumes to the way healthcare works in our country, but that's a different issue. And so I don't think it would, what it does do is raises the conversation. And if folks are trying to create policies that are welcoming and affirming, and this is one of those areas to have those conversations. It certainly wouldn't require that of a business, but it does certainly create opportunities to have conversations about it and ways to make it more LGBTQ.
From a proactivity point of view, the passing of legislation could be the entree point to that discussion. Sure. And use that as the entree point for that discussion.
Thank you. Further questions, yes, please.
George, you listed the surgeries that Aetna is offering to employers, or I'm sorry, is not offering to employers. Could you specify the ones that they are offering? And also, are you offering more ones?
Good question. I'm not a clinician, so let me see what sort of things that could be covered, and I don't pronounce them right, are mastectomy, mastopexy, mammoplasty, augmentation, nipple areola reconstruction, urethroplasty, amputation of penis, orchiectomy, simple, insertion of testicular prosthesis, etc. I mean, all the medical terms for the core surgery, and would be what we covered in classic core.
I'd say top and bottom surgery.
Yeah, that's what
That's what it was.
and then is our hormones covered?
Good question. Let me see if I can see.
Well, I can tell you when I had Aetna,
Yeah.
and they covered my testosterone.
They did cover your.
Yeah, they did. And I don't have Aetna, and they don't cover my testosterone.
Hey, thank you for the advertisement.
Well, it's the truth.
Yeah.
It's, and it didn't have to be like, that was before I was legally a male too, and they still covered it. So,
I'm not skilled at reading clinical bulletins, so I can't pull out formal therapy, but I trust the live example more than naive clinical.
Just a question, the criteria you described for the thing seem to go far beyond what the clinical DSM specifies, where it's usually 1 year of real-life test is requiring 2.
Yeah.
That seems punitive to the patient, to the customer, to the client.
I can't disagree with you.
Okay, is there a way to appeal that? Is there a way, I mean, I don't know how an employer or an employee, if the doctor says you're ready,
Yeah.
why does Aetna then say, I'm sorry, you'll have to wait another year?
Right. Yeah. I wish I had a better answer for it. I think this may be, the toe in the water, how we get involved initially, and maybe over time there'll be enough. There's certainly a challenge. There's an appeal process. There's a medical appeal process where you can go and say this is an appropriate one. If there are enough of those appeals, in which both medical doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists say that this is crazy, that a year's plenty time enough, then it can be modified. It could also serve, and I'm looking at our anchor thing, as something for internal, working as well, from our side to say, as members of this community. We think we appreciate what you've added to the portfolio, but we think there's some elements missing or that are not as embracing as they should be. And this is one, and maybe focus on just that one for the year. Just peck away at it. But I think this is the foot in the water to begin to address the issue, and we'll just have to get better as we go along.
I would add to that.
Please.
I feel like the Judiciary Committee on the Marriage Bill. Now for amendments. That, for better or worse, it's not limited to these kinds of, frankly, bizarre decision-making around medical procedures. Sort of taking it out of the hands of the healthcare provider, making decisions around it is by no means limited to these types of procedures. I mean, my partner is a midwife who does home births and hospital births, and so if you are over 35, 35 and a half, you are high risk and have to fight with the insurance company to have your home birth covered. Despite the fact that the healthcare provider is saying, you are not high risk, physical therapy is another fabulous one where your healthcare provider, your physical therapist is saying you need X number, and the insurance company says, no. Who's never seen you? So it's, for better or worse, it's not, I don't think it is necessarily coming from a place of happiness.
George, how long have you been offering this type of insurance?
For 1/1, so brand new coverage for us. Yeah, 1/1. So that's what I'm saying. We're neophytes in it, and we're going to hopefully improve it, tighten it up as we move forward with the marketplace and social pressures and internal agitation. Ultimately.
So you guys have this.
Good question.
Yeah. George, do you know what percentage of Aetna members have access to this benefit? Or do you know what percentage of employers have it in their plan? Has it been sold yet?
I don't know that it's been sold yet.
No,
I
yeah.
know the idea is that 1/1 was going to be offered to employees and sort of say to plan sponsors, we're offering it to our employees.
Right.
It's in our portfolio now.
Right.
I don't know if
I agree. Because there's a lead time. There's a long lead time to our sales process. So it was offered both internally, to Matt's point, internally, and as a product offering to plan sponsors. That's what we call our customers, plan sponsors, as a 1109. So, and typically it's a 8, 9, 10-month sales process leading to a July 1 or most typically a January 1 change. So the fact that it's offered now will most likely mean that the employers who are our customers will begin offering this July 1 or January 1, 2010 if they choose to get on board with it.
I would assume in terms of plan sponsors, you're either going to have large corporations that are progressive and are going to actively seek that out, or small businesses that are progressive and recognize it whether they have employees or not. And I think you're also going to have groups that have employees that are asking about this and saying you need to get this, whether you're a small or a large corporation. So I don't know how long it's going to take for plan sponsors to be having it, but it's going to have a lot to do with the employees itself and how progressive people that are making decisions in the plan sponsors are.
And just a completely unrelated question. Stephanie, I've realized that ENDA, the Employee Non-Discrimination Act, which is on a national level, and I know that it has sexual orientation, but I'm not sure if it has gender identity in it. Could you talk about ENDA and how it compares with the Connecticut bill and what's going on with each, or what's going on with ENDA in general?
And we're gonna say 2 minutes on that one.
And I can't say bad things about organizations, right?
No.
Okay. ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, has been brought up in Congress, federal level, to state, for several years now. And last year, started out as a good bill, a robust bill, that included sexual orientation and gender identity. And things were going well, and various individuals decided that perhaps they could get the bill through with sexual orientation by abandoning gender identity. And 9% of the community said, no, bad, all or nothing. One organization,
You can name.
HRC, you may have heard, equal sign thing, yeah. Perhaps more concerned with its position in the Beltline than doing the right thing, said, you know, if we can get it through, we should just get it through. And pretty much every other LGBT organization in the country said, bad idea, and tried to get it, and it didn't happen. This year, as a result of like every trans person and everybody who cares about trans people saying screw you to HRC. Are you recording all this?
He's actually at the camera now.
Has perhaps because every trans person ally has not perhaps donated money to HRC. HRC has at least at this moment taken the position that this year it will only support an inclusive ENDA. It's not any place right now. As far as I mean, there's been some initial discussions, but it's not happening any place right now. It's on the table as that's what the HRC people call it. So in terms of how this works, sort of just a basic law kind of thing. Federal law essentially sets the floor. So if an inclusive ENDA passed, it would apply to everybody that it applied to. Whereas the state law applies obviously in the state and can be more inclusive, it can be more expansive. The Employment Non-Discrimination Act is just that, employment. It doesn't cover public accommodation, it doesn't cover education, it doesn't cover credit. And so the Connecticut law would be far more inclusive than the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, but that's basically.
Is ENDA gaining momentum now with the transgender inclusion part of it now, or?
You know what, the scenes in movies where you hear crickets? That's kind of where ENDA's at right now.
Okay.
And there's not much happening right now.
There's been some conversation,
Yeah,
but
but it's
nothing's
not.
been introduced.
This whole economy thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to ask George to do something. First, I'd like to say thank you for ENDA doing what it's doing. I'd like to make 2 points quickly. And what I'd like to ask you to do is carry these back home. I'm a member of the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. We are the professional community in the world. The current standards you have in place are totally out of line with the world standards. I would suggest your company reconsider and bring your standards in line with the world community and not wait to be appealed and not wait to be seen as the bad people, but just show the leadership right now and get in line with the world community. The second point is that, and this is not a subtle point, the language in your policy about sexual reassignment surgery is language that's been dropped out a long time ago. So using antiquated language to describe a process that does not capture what this involved. The language being used is gender confirmation surgery. It's not about sex, it's about gender. Big difference.
Yep.
And if anybody doesn't understand it, there's a lot of us in this room would be happy to tell you about it. So it's gender confirmation surgery.
Thank you. I'll give you my card
Thank you.
at the end of the
I'll-
meeting, and if you'd send me those world standards as you have them, I'd be happy to communicate.
Yeah, let me just say you can Google WPATH, W-P-A-T-H, the standards of care
Okay,
from this world-class body is there. Those are the ones everybody uses,
okay.
and your standards are way more restrictive than what the world community requires.
And that's WPATH?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, and that may be something to also work with the Angle folks on. Appreciate that.
Yes. Just one, I'm a Canadian, so, and it hasn't really affected us, but the one comment I saw on a list or a message board was, there's two things you don't want to see being made, legislation and sausages.
Yeah. You're right.
But Tony, I have a question for you. And from a basic legislation standpoint, what would have made your journey easier?
Well, I guess if my employer was really educated, but I can't, my journey was easy. It really was. I mean, compared to what most of the community goes through, it was easy. So I don't know if it could have really gotten any easier. I mean, my God, they sent me a plant saying, you know, new beginning, and, you know, my God, you know, every plant in this arrangement meant, you know, a new start on life and all this stuff. I mean, they were really, really supportive. I mean, my personal journey was
What about the other
Yes.
journeys you've witnessed of other trans people?
well, the trans people that I know of now, I'm trying to help them through.
But is there any legislation that you'd like to see passed that would help a
The
trans
bill
person?
that's in place right now.
What about your surgeries and insurance coverage?
Well, the chest surgery was out of pocket. It would have been nice if it wasn't. That was almost a total of $8,000. And my hysterectomy was covered by insurance. We had that covered. Though, you know, Aetna did say to the doctor, wait a minute, if you take his uterus out, he's really going to be a man. And so the doctor came back and they fought, and then they finally covered it. So I was fortunate. But even so, that's why I started the foundation, because, you know, there'll always be people, even if the health insurance companies start covering the surgeries, there'll always be people who don't have health insurance. And it shouldn't be, you know, okay, you have the money, so now you can be healthy and live a really healthy life. I think it's up to our community, the trans community, to take care of each other and just help each other out. It's as simple as that. So.
I'd like to ask you, does the company have a transition policy? Do you have any policies around transitioning employees?
Edna?
Yeah.
In terms of,
If an employee is going to transition, is there a policy in place for that employee?
I'm not aware of anything specific around that. I think those are handled.
Some more homework.
That's a
right?
good
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I think in answer to that, at least, you know, that companies who have good policies in place, not just any policy, but good policies in place to help to work with the employees, so that it's not a guessing game, so it's not, you know, up to the employee to educate the entire company about what it means to transition. That, you know, there are folks for larger companies, the sort of the best practices is to work with someone, you know, an HR type person, as well as an affinity group or whatever the acronym was that you guys have, you know, to have sort of a liaison there to help this person access the group and provide support and so forth, and to have some guidelines. And you know, there's some what am I blocking her name? Jillian Weiss, thank you. Has a great book that is, all policies can be improved upon, but it's certainly a good starting place to see. It's certainly also designed for larger companies, but to have something in place and to sort of mold it to work with, you know, the size company that you're in, what the folks' needs are. Obviously, if there's somebody, you know, in the company who's interested in working on it, who can sort of talk about what would have been useful for that when they transition and so forth. But so that it's not sort of a, how are you going to do it? Everything from, particularly in organizations where there are, employee IDs and security issues and, so forth, that there's something in place. So it's not this sort of, people throw up their hands. And if you are in a company that's not particularly, where there's an individual who's not particularly supportive, and that's the person that you sort of get stuck with, having a policy in place that folks can follow is certainly a positive thing. I think that most folks would like.
My turn to piggyback on you this time. Based on what Stephanie said, I think she addresses a great set of things that could be done and improved upon in a workplace environment. But in terms of that individual, one thing that is available to that person is the EAP benefit. So there's available counselors, and again, the doc fine, the link to the LGBT allied psychologists and
Gay
stuff.
Lesbian Medical Association.
Yeah,
That's what it is.
What is it?
GLM.
GLMA, yes, the GLMA site would give you access to psychologists and psychiatrists as well. So that would be the limit that I'm aware of, but that's at least one piece of it.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, in the absence of non-discrimination legislation and in a company where there's no non-discrimination policy, and a person who works there who wants to transition and really doesn't have a clue what the response might be in the HR department, are there any protective steps a person could take to be better prepared? I don't mean just to articulate your point about, but I mean, is there any kind of legal, any kind of protection, anything someone can do before they approach their HR department that would protect them in some way from that?
I think that there are a lot of things that folks can do. Obviously having a policy legislation would be ideal. But I think there are resources in the community, certainly, folks to talk to who have transitioned at work, who can, sort of talk through different challenges that someone might face, and not to, but counsel, talking to an attorney, who works in this area. Because, that's one of the challenges is that there's certainly suits, every day, and there's been some successful suits that have moved the existing law forward. Not to sound too, I represent employees only, just to give you my perspective. But, there's ways to go about doing it that, to protect yourself. And to, because if an employee goes in and says, screw you all, this is what I'm doing, I don't care what you think, and is being sort of a jerk, not being professional, it's not going to, no matter what the company's perspective is, no company wants an employee who's behaving poorly. And so getting some advice about going in and how to do it and what makes the most sense and resources. That's one of the things, as much fun as it can be, most of my life is not in a courtroom, but is in advising clients on a whole host of issues, including this, and have worked, in fact, with folks in some pretty, I worked with a Department of Corrections correction officer who is transitioning. Fun little place to transition. And so, and kind of working through and making contacts with folks and figuring out kind of the best way to do it. And frankly, sometimes, it didn't come to this, but one of the things that we talked about is, what happens when your attorney calls? Companies are sometimes more cautious in how they treat their employees if they know there's an attorney out there. And so, but there's various ways to do that. And being professional, certainly, I would say the first thing that somebody should do.
We have about 5 more minutes.
One question? I came out of my company a few months ago, and I was really relieved that they were pretty accepting of it. I think one of the things that we have to take into account before we do this is the company itself, obviously. Previous to, right now I work for Cincinnati or Hartford Hospital, and before that I was a lineman, and working on the poles and things like that, and that wouldn't work. The company I worked for that.
Right.
I had started the transition at that company, I had started the transition while I was working there, but realized it wouldn't work. And look for employee, a company that I was pretty sure would be a lot more comfortable with transsexual working for them. And I think this, we have to gear our sights, at least for the time being, toward those companies that we think are a lot better fit. And I think that's really important. And another friend of mine worked for a company for 14 years and stayed on the job and transitioned about 2 years ago. And they waited for the right time, and after 14 years of her being a key employee, they dropped her. Just simply because of that, for no other reason. And it happens. That was also a male-oriented company. That's one of the things you have to stay away from because they won't accept you. It's their culture.
One of the things that I would also say about this bill, it's very, very important, but it doesn't fix discrimination. We have laws about discrimination against folks because of their race, because of their sex, because of disability, and yet I'm very busy. And so, and I think you make a really good point, and it's not, there's a certain, element of privilege to be able to, economic times are very challenging right now, but safety is important, and assessing those things and making those decisions, because this bill is not going to stop somebody at the end of the day from firing people and from mistreating them.
This new, sorry.
I was just wondering, what do you find to be the biggest argument or opposition to passing this legislation, besides the passage issue or just lack of tolerance and difference?
One of the issues that has come up is about teachers. There are folks out there who are very, very concerned that little Johnny or little Susie is going to be devastated by Mr. Smith coming to school the next day as Miss Smith. And I guess there's the other piece of it is smaller, but it's sort of a religious piece that we're going to have nuns transition.
Did you say nuns transition?
Yeah. But there's actually, there's the whole separation of church and state. In fact, the state doesn't get to tell the church who they're not, because then, in fact, women could be priests and men could be nuns, but they can't because the state can't. And so those are probably the two. The teacher one, though, I think is probably a little bit bigger for folks, that they get, despite the fact that teachers have transitioned successfully, that, it's important to have role models for trans students, it's, all of these kinds of things. There are some folks who are really, who get kind of stuck on that and are very reluctant and want to have very restrictive amendments on the bill saying that, no discrimination except teachers.
Obi, can I add
Yeah, please.
friendly building on that, is that this message coming from the other side is also something that the gay and lesbian community has faced before.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is nothing.
Yeah, this is nothing new for our community, and I think that's something that you can, that's definitely a reason for gay and lesbian people to get involved with this legislation. And the world never ended, and kids are fine if they have a gay man as a first grade teacher or a lesbian as a teacher, or anything like that. So very similar.
Barbara, you had the last question.
The question I have is, even if you get this law passed, what's the process for enforcing it? I have this image of someone standing on the bow of a sinking ship saying, but I had the right of way, because half the people that are taking this cause and taking action against using this law are left without a job while it's going through the courts and stuff, and it can take months, it can take years.
Years. Not months. Definitely.
I'd like to think months.
Yeah. No. Valid.
Is there an enforcement process? Is there something that can stop an employer in their tracks if this law passes? Come on, rip off the shirt, I want to see the yes.
You know, and I think that's my point in terms of, you know, we have the ADA. We even have a new ADA that's better and improved than the one before. And in fact, it is. I mean, I don't mean to, there are still challenges, but, you know, it's not, you're absolutely right that, you know, it's about having a remedy to it. It's about, you know, ideally, it's about before somebody's fired, when they're treated differently, that there's a way to address that. It's a hard balance, but it, like, you know, but that, I mean, it's what I do all the time. But it's about educating folks, because there, you know, there would be education along with it. I mean, you know, many of you have probably seen, you know, sort of the signs in the kitchen break room kind of thing about all the laws that exist in the state of Connecticut that are required to be there. Minimum wage law, you know, things like that. And, you know, in the same way that those are there, this law would be there, which, you know, has an educational piece to it. But the reality is that if somebody, you know, if you show up for a job and somebody says, "You're tall," I'm really uncomfortable with that, and you don't get the job. First of all, unless they're as silly as in the Schroer case, and actually tell you why they're not on the job, you know, you're not going to know. I mean, unless you don't get a job, and you may be suspicious, but you don't know, and it's not going to get you the job. Similarly, you know, if you're included in a reduction in force, you know, you may say, I just transitioned and came out, or I just told them I was going to transition and I suddenly got included in it. You're not going to be any more employed. But it's about remedy. Go ahead.
And, you know, I'm going to put on a different hat. I'm pure kind of a corporate guy, but I come out of a 60s era student protesting radical big hair history. So I'm going to put that hat on for a minute. And the court of public opinion is a useful one as well. The last thing an organization like Aetna wants is to see an embarrassing story on the front page of the Hartford Courant, or even the business section of the Hartford Courant. Diane Levick is announced to, that's the business writer for the insurance industry, for the Hartford Courant. They quake when she's nearby. You know, what it's going to write about is what it's going to do. So if someone is clearly doing something that's wrong, you know, that's against the law, a public protest around that, you know, where you know your facts are right and you've got a good solid base for that, can be a motivator too. It doesn't have to be the marshals coming in to enforce or the attorney general's office coming to enforce. You know, go back to my word again, the court of public opinion can be leveraged in this regard as well.
It's also an incentive for the employer to address, you know, manager type folks engaging, or coworkers engaging in bad behavior. You know, I mean, it's a few different levels.
Thank you very much, Tony, George, Stephanie. We